Did you see that? The cameraman's voice cracked as he lowered his equipment, hands trembling. October 15th, 1974. Kinshasa, Zaire. The rumble in the jungle had just ended, but what happened in those 3 seconds of darkness would haunt everyone present for decades. Muhammad Ali stood motionless in the center of the ring, sweat glistening under the restored floodlights. George Foreman lay unconscious on the canvas. 60,000 spectators erupted in celebration, but the dozen people who witnessed what occurred during the blackout remained eerily silent. "I've been filming fights for 20 years, whispered Harold Morrison, the veteran HBO cameraman, to his assistant. "I've never seen anything like what just happened." The assistant, barely 22 and fresh out of film school, nodded frantically. "Should we tell someone? Should we report what we saw?" Morrison grabbed his arm firmly. "Kid, some things are better left unsaid, trust me on this." But the young man couldn't shake the image from his mind. In those 3 seconds when the generators failed and darkness swallowed the stadium, he had seen something impossible, something that defied every law of physics he knew. Dr. Patricia Williams, the ringside physician, was checking her watch when the lights went out. She had been monitoring both fighters' conditions throughout the brutal 8 rounds. When darkness fell, she instinctively reached for her medical bag, expecting chaos. Instead, she heard something that made her blood run cold. Silence. Complete, unnatural silence. No crowd noise, no breathing, no heartbeats, nothing. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the lights returned. The roar of the crowd exploded back to life. Foreman was down. Ali was victorious. But Dr. Williams noticed something that would keep her awake for months. Ali's heart rate, which she had been monitoring wirelessly through experimental equipment, showed something impossible. For exactly 3 seconds, his heart had stopped beating. Not slowed down. Stopped. Completely. "That's medically impossible," she muttered, checking her equipment frantically. "A person can't survive cardiac arrest and immediately return to normal function." But the readings were clear. 3 seconds of flatline, then normal rhythm resumed. Meanwhile, in the VIP section, renowned sports journalist Howard Cosell was frantically scribbling notes. He had been calling the fight live for ABC when the blackout occurred. His microphone had gone dead, but his recorder kept running. When he played it back later, he discovered something that would change his perspective on reality forever. During those 3 seconds, his voice could be heard on the recording, but he wasn't speaking English. He wasn't speaking any recognizable language at all. The sounds coming from his mouth were unlike anything linguists would later be able to identify. "I don't remember saying anything during the blackout," Cosell confided to his producer later that night. "I don't even remember thinking anything. It was like I wasn't there." The producer, a skeptical man who had covered wars and disasters, found himself believing every word, because he had experienced something similar. For 3 seconds, he had felt like he was floating above the stadium, watching the scene from impossible heights. Don King, the flamboyant promoter, was counting money in his private box when the lights failed. A practical man who believed only in what he could touch and spend, King found himself face to face with something that challenged everything he thought he knew about the world. In the darkness, he saw Ali clearly, not with his eyes, but with something deeper. The fighter was surrounded by a soft golden light that seemed to emanate from within. But more disturbing was what King saw in Ali's eyes during those 3 seconds. They weren't the eyes of a boxer who had just won the fight of his life. They were the eyes of someone who had seen something profound, something that transcended the physical world they all inhabited. "Champ." King approached Ali in the locker room hours later, his usual bombastic personality subdued. "What happened out there during the blackout?" Ali looked at him with those same eyes King had seen in the darkness. For a moment, the fighter seemed about to speak. Then he smiled that famous smile and deflected with humor. "Don, you've been drinking too much champagne. Ain't nothing happened except me showing the world I'm the greatest." But King noticed Ali's hands were shaking as he said it. The 3 seconds that changed everything began at exactly 11:47 p.m. local time. The backup generators, which should have kicked in immediately, failed for reasons engineers could never explain. The primary power grid, which had been functioning perfectly, experienced a surge that defied electrical principles. But the most disturbing detail was discovered weeks later by a young electrical engineer named Marcus Thompson. While reviewing the power company's automated logs, he found something that made him question his sanity. During those 3 seconds, the power consumption in the stadium hadn't dropped to zero as expected. Instead, it had spiked to levels that should have been impossible with the equipment available. The energy reading suggested something had drawn massive amounts of electricity from the grid, something that wasn't supposed to exist. Thompson tried to report his findings to his supervisors, but the logs mysteriously disappeared from the company's servers the next day. When he attempted to recreate his analysis, he found that all backup copies had been corrupted. "It's like someone doesn't want this information to exist," he told his girlfriend that night. "But I know what I saw. Something was drawing power during that blackout. Something big." His girlfriend, a rational woman who worked as a nurse, found herself believing him despite her skepticism. Because she'd been watching the fight on television, and during those 3 seconds, her TV had displayed something impossible. Instead of static or a blank screen, she had seen what appeared to be a bird's-eye view of the stadium. But the perspective was wrong. It was as if the camera was floating hundreds of feet above the building, looking down at the crowd. The image was crystal clear, showing details that no camera could have captured from that angle. She could see individual faces in the crowd, could read the expressions of confusion and wonder on their features. But most disturbing of all, she could see Ali in the center of the ring, glowing with that same golden light that Don King had witnessed. If you're fascinated by this mystery and want to uncover what really happened in those 3 seconds, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Drop a comment below with your theory about what Ali experienced. This story gets even more incredible, and you won't want to miss what we reveal next. The investigation into the 3-second phenomenon began unofficially the very next morning. Dr. Patricia Williams couldn't sleep after what she had witnessed. Her medical training demanded logical explanations, but everything about that night defied logic. She returned to the stadium at dawn, hoping to find some clue that might explain the impossible readings she had recorded. The venue was eerily quiet, with only maintenance crews cleaning up the debris from the previous night's celebration. "Excuse me," she approached one of the workers, an elderly man who had been employed at the stadium for over 30 years. "Were you here during the fight last night?" The man stopped sweeping and looked at her with eyes that seemed much older than his face. "I was here, doctor. Been working every major event in this place since it opened." "Did you notice anything unusual during the power outage?" The man set down his broom and studied her carefully. "You saw something too, didn't you?" Dr. Williams felt her heart rate increase. "What do you mean?" "Every few years something like this happens. Not always during fights. Sometimes during concerts. Sometimes during political rallies. The lights go out for just a few seconds, and those who are paying attention see things they can't explain." "What kind of things?" The man glanced around nervously as if making sure they weren't being overheard. "Lights that don't come from any source. People moving in ways that ain't natural. Time that doesn't flow the way it should." Dr. Williams felt a chill run down her spine. "How many people know about this?" "More than you'd think. Fewer than you'd hope. Most folks convince themselves they imagined it. Easier that way. But you don't think we imagined it." The man shook his head slowly. "Doctor, I've seen a lot of strange things in my life. But what happened last night, that was different. Stronger. Like whatever's been sleeping under this place finally woke up." Meanwhile, across town, Harold Morrison was developing the film from the previous night. As a professional cameraman, he had shot thousands of hours of footage, but he had never been nervous about seeing his own work before. The first 7 rolls developed normally, showing the fight exactly as it had appeared to the naked eye. But the 8th roll, the one that had been running during the blackout, was different. The film showed the 3 seconds of darkness, but it wasn't completely black. There were shapes moving in the shadows, forms that seemed to dance around the ring in patterns that hurt to look at directly. And in the center of it all, Ali stood perfectly still, but his shadow was moving independently, reaching toward something outside the frame. Morrison's hands shook as he held the negatives up to the light. In over 2 decades of professional photography, he had never seen anything like this. Shadows didn't move independently of their sources. It was physically impossible. But the evidence was right there in his hands. He made a single print of the most clear frame and locked the negatives in his personal safe. Then he sat in his dark room for 3 hours, staring at the image and trying to convince himself it was a processing error. The photograph showed Ali in perfect detail, despite the darkness that surrounded him. But his shadow, clearly visible on the canvas, was reaching toward the corner of the ring where George Foreman would fall unconscious moments later. As if it knew what was going to happen before it occurred, Dr. Williams spent the next week researching everything she could find about the stadium's history. What she discovered in the city archives made her question everything she thought she knew about the building. The stadium had been built on the site of an ancient burial ground, a fact that had been carefully omitted from all official documentation. The construction had been plagued by unusual accidents and unexplained phenomena that the builders had attributed to local superstitions. But the most disturbing discovery was a pattern she found in the medical records from previous events. Every major gathering at the stadium had resulted in at least a dozen reports of unusual experiences during brief power outages. Witnesses described seeing lights that cast no shadows, hearing voices speaking in unknown languages, and experiencing moments where time seemed to stop completely. The reports had been dismissed as mass hysteria or alcohol-related hallucinations. But Dr. Williams recognized the consistency in the descriptions. These weren't random delusions. They were systematic observations of something real, something that had been happening for years. She decided to contact some of the other witnesses from the fight, starting with Howard Cosell. The veteran journalist was initially reluctant to discuss what he had experienced, but eventually agreed to meet her at a quiet restaurant downtown. "I've been in this business for 30 years, Cosell said, stirring his coffee nervously. "I've covered wars, assassinations, and every major sporting event you can imagine. I thought I had seen everything, but what happened that night was different." "Different doesn't begin to describe it, Doctor. For 3 seconds, I wasn't Howard Cosell anymore. I was something else. Something that could see the entire stadium from above, could hear every heartbeat in the crowd, could feel the thoughts of 60,000 people." Dr. Williams leaned forward. "What did you see when you looked at Ali?" Cosell's face went pale. He wasn't alone in that ring. There was something with him. Something that had been waiting for exactly the right moment to reveal itself. What kind of something? I don't know. But whatever it was, it chose Ali for a reason. And I think what happened that night was just the beginning. As Dr. Williams left the restaurant, she noticed a black sedan that had been parked across the street when she arrived. The same car followed her for 6 blocks before disappearing into traffic. Someone was watching the people who had witnessed the 3-second phenomenon. Someone who didn't want the truth to come out. But the truth had a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply it was buried. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Marcus Thompson, the electrical engineer who had discovered the impossible power readings, received a phone call at 2 a.m, exactly 1 week after the fight. "Mr. Thompson?" The voice was elderly, with a slight accent he couldn't identify. "I understand you've been asking questions about what happened at the stadium." Thompson sat up in bed, instantly alert. "Who is this?" "Someone who has been waiting a very long time for the right person to ask the right questions. Meet me tomorrow at the old library on 5th Street. Come alone and bring whatever evidence you've managed to preserve." The line went dead before Thompson could respond. Despite every instinct telling him not to go, Thompson found himself at the library the next afternoon. The building was nearly empty, with only a few elderly patrons reading newspapers in the main hall. In the back corner, sitting at a table covered with old books and yellowed documents, was a man who appeared to be in his 80s. His eyes, however, seemed much younger. "Mr. Thompson, thank you for coming. My name is Professor Edmund Blackwood, and I've been studying phenomena like what you witnessed for over 50 years. Thompson sat down cautiously. "What kind of phenomena?" Professor Blackwood opened one of the books on the table, revealing pages covered with diagrams and symbols that looked ancient. Temporal anomalies. Moments when the normal flow of time and space becomes flexible. That's impossible. Is it? You've seen the power readings. You know something drew massive amounts of energy during those 3 seconds. Energy that had to come from somewhere and go somewhere. Thompson pulled out the copies he had managed to save before the originals disappeared. These readings show consumption levels that should have overloaded every circuit in the building. Professor Blackwood studied the documents carefully. Fascinating. The pattern is consistent with what I observed in 1963 during the Kennedy assassination. and again in 1969 during the moon landing. You're saying this has happened before? Mr. Thompson, this has been happening throughout human history. Moments of great significance when the attention of millions of people focuses on a single point in space and time sometimes create opportunities. Opportunities for what? Professor Blackwood closed the book and looked directly at Thompson. For things that exist outside our normal understanding of reality to briefly enter our world, and sometimes for people like Muhammad Ali to briefly enter theirs. The implications of what Professor Blackwood was suggesting hit Thompson like a physical blow. You're saying Ali somehow left our reality during those 3 seconds? I'm saying that what made Muhammad Ali the greatest boxer who ever lived might not have been entirely human. And what happened that night in Kinshasa was the moment when his true nature was finally revealed. Thompson felt his worldview crumbling. But that's impossible. Mr. Thompson, you've seen the evidence. You know something extraordinary occurred. The question isn't whether it happened. The question is what we do with that knowledge. Professor Blackwood gathered his books and stood to leave. There are others like you, Mr. Thompson. People who witnessed the truth and refused to let it be buried. If you're interested in learning more, there's a meeting tomorrow night. But I must warn you, once you take this path, there's no going back to the comfortable illusion that the world is exactly what it appears to be. He handed Thompson a business card with only an address and a time written on it. The choice is yours. As Professor Blackwood walked away, Thompson noticed that several other people in the library were watching him. People who had been pretending to read, but were actually listening to every word of their conversation. The conspiracy to hide the truth about the 3-second phenomenon was larger and more organized than he had imagined. But so was the group of people determined to expose it. The meeting took place in the basement of an old church on the outskirts of the city. When Thompson arrived, he was surprised to find nearly 20 people gathered in a circle, including several faces he recognized from the fight. Dr. Patricia Williams was there, along with Harold Morrison and his young assistant. Even Don King sat in the corner, looking uncharacteristically subdued. Professor Blackwood stood at the center of the group, holding a thick folder filled with documents and photographs. Welcome, everyone. I know this gathering represents a significant risk for all of you, but what we witnessed 8 days ago cannot be ignored. He opened the folder and began distributing copies of photographs and documents. What you're seeing are records of similar events dating back over a century, moments when reality became permeable. Thompson studied the photographs. They showed various historical events, political rallies, sporting competitions, concerts, all featuring the same phenomenon. Brief moments of darkness followed by unexplained lights and impossible shadows. The pattern is always the same, Professor Blackwood continued. Large gatherings of people, moments of intense emotional focus, and individuals who seem to serve as conduits for something beyond our understanding. Dr. Williams raised her hand. Are you suggesting that Ali is some kind of, what, alien, supernatural being? I'm suggesting that certain individuals throughout history have possessed abilities that transcend normal human limitations, and that these abilities sometimes manifest during moments of extreme stress or significance. Harold Morrison spoke up from the back of the room. I've got photographs that show Ali's shadow moving independently during the blackout. How do you explain that? The same way I explain the power readings Mr. Thompson discovered, or the medical anomalies Dr. Williams recorded. These phenomena are connected to something that exists outside our normal 3-dimensional reality. Don King, who had been silent until now, suddenly stood up. This is all very interesting, Professor, but what does it mean? What are we supposed to do with this information? Professor Blackwood smiled grimly. We document it, we preserve it, and we prepare for what's coming next. What's coming next? Mr. King, what happened in Kinshasa was not an isolated incident. It was a signal, an announcement that something significant is about to change in our world, and Muhammad Ali is at the center of it. The room fell silent as the implications of his words sank in. Thompson felt compelled to ask the question everyone was thinking. How do you know all this? How long have you been studying these phenomena? Professor Blackwood's expression grew distant. Because, Mr. Thompson, I was there when it first began. December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor. I was a young naval officer stationed at the base when the attack occurred. He paused, as if deciding how much to reveal. During the bombing, there was a moment, just 3 seconds, when time stopped completely. I saw things that day that convinced me our understanding of reality is fundamentally flawed. What did you see? I saw the future, Mr. Thompson. I saw this meeting. I saw all of you. And I saw what Muhammad Ali will become. The weight of his words settled over the group like a heavy blanket. They had gathered seeking answers, but Professor Blackwood's revelations only raised more questions. Dr. Williams broke the silence. If you've known about this for over 30 years, why haven't you gone public? Why keep it secret? Because, Doctor, the world isn't ready for this truth. And because there are forces at work that will do anything to keep it hidden. As if summoned by his words, the sound of car engines could be heard outside the church. Multiple vehicles arriving simultaneously. Professor Blackwood's face went pale. They found us sooner than I expected. Everyone needs to leave, now. Use the back exit and don't go home tonight. Who found us? Thompson demanded. People who have been hiding this truth for decades. People who believe that knowledge like this is too dangerous for the general public. The sound of footsteps echoed from the stairs leading to the basement, heavy boots moving with military precision. Go, Professor Blackwood whispered urgently. Preserve what you've learned. Tell others. Don't let them bury the truth. As the group scattered through the back exit, Thompson grabbed Professor Blackwood's arm. What about Ali? Is he in danger? The old man's eyes were filled with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Mr. Thompson, Muhammad Ali stopped being in danger the moment he stepped into that ring in Kinshasa. What he became that night, it's beyond anything those people can control. What did he become? Professor Blackwood smiled as the footsteps grew closer. The bridge between our world and something infinitely larger. And that bridge is about to open permanently. The last thing Thompson saw as he escaped into the night was Professor Blackwood, calmly sitting back down at the table, waiting for whoever was coming down those stairs. The old man had spent over 30 years preparing for this moment, and he was ready to face whatever consequences came with revealing the truth. But the truth about Muhammad Ali and the 3 seconds that changed everything was now in the hands of people who would never stop searching for answers. People who had seen beyond the veil of ordinary reality and could never go back to believing the comfortable lies that most of humanity accepted as truth. The real story was just beginning. And somewhere in a hotel room in Kinshasa, Muhammad Ali sat alone, staring at his hands and remembering what it felt like to touch the infinite. He knew they would come for him eventually, the people who feared what he had become. But he also knew that what had awakened in him that night could never be put back to sleep. The greatest fight of his life wasn't against George Foreman. It was against those who would try to hide the truth about what humanity was capable of becoming. And Muhammad Ali had never lost a fight that truly mattered. The 3 seconds of darkness had ended, but the light they revealed would shine forever. This is just the beginning of a mystery that spans decades and involves some of the most powerful people in the world. If you want to discover the full truth about what Muhammad Ali experienced that night and how it connects to other unexplained phenomena throughout history, subscribe now and turn on notifications. Share this video with someone who needs to know the truth. The evidence we've uncovered will shock you, and the people trying to hide it will stop at nothing to keep these secrets buried. Don't let them win. Join us in exposing the greatest cover-up in modern history.